You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lemons podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're going to make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me. My name is Megan Kuhar. I am a percussionist, and I started studying music way back in second grade with piano, and it's always been a part of my life. I studied music in college. I went to Baldwin-Wallace Conservatory of Music, and when I was there, I focused a lot on West African percussion and Afro-Cuban percussion. So I'm actually like one of those percussionists who doesn't really dive into drum set too much. I spend a lot more of my time doing other different types of percussion. But so I married a drummer. So I am in a band with him, and I actually teach at Baldwin-Wallace, where I went to school. I am a music technology professor there. Went and got my master's in music technology. I have an audio engineering degree. And what I teach there is I start by teaching the freshmen, all music majors, education, therapy, performance, composition, all of them. And we talk about technology like Sibelius and Finale, but then we also talk about video and iMovie and learning how to edit video and shoot video. And then we also, as they kind of progress further into their 4 years in college, we learn about branding and marketing as a musician. And so I have them build a website. I have them come up with their brand identity. And so all of that to say is that I spend a lot of time talking about this in my job as a professor, and so I really enjoy doing it, and I wanted to kind of bring that more to a general population of musicians. So I actually coach musicians online through social media as well as private calls about branding and marketing as a musician, and it's such a huge, important thing for us to all think about, and I think a lot of musicians struggle with it. So it's something that I feel like is my passion, and I just really love helping musicians to become better entrepreneurs in that way.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got all kinds of stuff going on for you. And I know I had a professor or a teacher back on the podcast a few episodes ago, and I was congratulating him and thanking him because the world needs more teachers. So I just want to thank you for being and giving back. And I admire teachers. I love teachers, and I always try to support them in any way that I can. So what got you into percussion, and what got you into music kind of as a whole? Like, how did you originally get into all this stuff?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I think when I was in second grade, and it had been probably about a year of me like begging to have a piano. So my parents got a used piano from a local store, and I started taking private piano lessons. I think like the first kind of reason why I loved music was my aunts had a bunch of cassette tapes, and one of them was the Beach Boys' Do It Again. And I just like fell in love with all the harmonies and the stacked like everything just happening all at once. And I just thought it was so cool. I used to try and sing everything at the same time, like jumping between all the different harmony parts. And so I really loved music from that age. And when I was in fifth grade, started percussion in band, mainly because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. And I think my dad just was like, you should play the drums. And I was like, yes, I should play the drums. So I started off in fifth grade in band. So yeah, it just kind of felt like a natural next step for me. I really loved, all kinds of music, rock music, everything. So I was really into it from that age, and just really loved my favorite thing ever. It's really funny, but my favorite thing to do and like my dream was to sing harmonies, play keyboards, and play auxiliary percussion in a family band, because I always wanted to be in a family band, And that is literally what I'm doing now. So I don't know how that dream came to reality, but somehow I'm doing that. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool, and especially because it was a dream and it was such a niche dream. Like, it's so specific.
I know, it's crazy.
And you've accomplished it and made it come to fruition. So why, you said you don't get behind a drum set very often. A lot of times when people say they're a percussionist or they're a drummer, they think immediately they're in a rock band or they're playing major drum sets. So why the different cultural drums, like African drums, like you had mentioned, and things like that?
Yeah. So I used to play drum set in a band, and I do like it. But what really kind of drew me to West African, specifically Ghanaian percussion and also Cuban percussion, was I actually just have this weird knack for hearing rhythms and repeating them. And so all of that music is learned by ear. And just there's a lot of polyrhythms and a lot of weird scales and things that aren't really something that we are used to as Westerners. And it just came naturally to me to be able to kind of call and response rhythm and to feel it out. Like, I played a lot of bata drums in college and beyond college as well. And for that, it's so fluid. There's so much like listening to the lead drummer and hearing certain cues, rhythmic cues, and responding to them with certain responses. And it's kind of like choose your own adventure with rhythm. And I just was able to understand, I just felt polyrhythms. I felt I could hear it and repeat it. And so it was easier for me than reading sheet music. I just always liked it better. It was more enjoyable. And I was just able to kind of do what I wanted with my specific degree that I had. And it just was something that I fell in love with. So that was what I spent a lot of my time doing.
That's awesome. And like, a lot of that music can definitely get very complex, and it's not, like you had mentioned, it's not something we Westerners see every day on or hear on the radio and pop music or even some of the jazz music and stuff. It's not that different and culturally diverse. Mm-hmm. So that's so cool to hear that, and that you have such an experience in that. So kind of going back a little bit, you talked about you teaching brand identity as a musician. And I know how in today's digital age and realm, how important it is to have an identity as a musician or even as a professional anywhere. How and why is it important, from your experience, to have an identity, especially as a musician?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that a lot of musicians, they kind of struggle with is they know they need to post on social media, but they don't think about it in a more holistic way. They're just kind of like haphazardly posting content, and they don't have any sort of consistency in their message. So it's really important to think about what you're doing kind of like before you do it. So having a brand identity, really, to me, it's all about creating clarity and making sure that you know what your message is that you're trying to share, and then also sharing that in a consistent way. And so I kind of work with those two things: clarity, consistency. I also encourage musicians to share stories and to share personal content, and kind of move away from using Instagram, using Facebook as like bulletin board messages, and really kind of sharing like, oh, here's what I'm up to. I'm going to play this show on Friday. It's $5. Hope you come. And really making it more about sharing a story of who they are and like the process that it takes to get to those places, and just creating that fan base, that following, that connection, that relationship. And that can really only be done if you kind of do the homework before and think about like, what is my perspective? What is my purpose? Like, what am I trying to say? What's my message? And so that's kind of the first thing you need to do, is come up with that brand identity.
And for an artist that maybe struggles with a brand identity, how can they kind of discover that?
So there's a lot of self-reflection that you can go to kind of think about it. But I actually have a course that I'm developing that has a lot of content that allows you to think through like, what are my creative core values? So asking yourself like, why do I create? What do I create for? Like, what's the reason why I'm doing this? And a lot of people don't think about it. Like, just like me, I started music in second grade. When I was in second grade, I started it because I thought it was cool and fun, and I wanted to like have fun playing a piano. I didn't think about the underlying reasons why I was doing it. And a lot of people start that way, and they might not really stop and think and look and realize, like, why am I doing this? So thinking about that, thinking about why are you creating? What are you trying to contribute? What are you creating for? And then taking that and combining it with a bunch of other things, like you want to think about what's unique about me as a person, like unrelated to music. Am I, do I lift heavy weights? Am I like, do I have a huge beard? Like, do I love the color pink? Am I really fashionable? Like, there's so many different things about each one of us that can be sort of interwoven into our brand that, we all approach music in our own way, but we all approach it with our own voice. So you have to think about all that stuff. You also want to think about kind of like what your method is for music. So am I kind of a free flow writer or creator, or am I really technical? Or, for me, it's all about harmonies. It's all about auxiliary percussion. It's all about rhythm. It's all about, creating that call and response, that conversation with music. And not everybody's like that. So that has to do with who I am, and it has to do with the type of music I like to play. It's hard for me to kind of explain, like, here's step one, here's step two. It's really a long process, and it's all about looking inside and really asking yourself, like, why am I doing this? What am I doing? And who am I as a person? So yeah, it takes a lot of self-reflection, and it's not easy to do. So, but I just really encourage musicians to really think about all of these things, because, I've had students in my classes, in college. In college, we might not know too much about who we are or what we're trying to do, and that's fine. You got to kind of think through that stuff. But I've had students before where I've asked them, like, think about an ideal, like an opera singer. Think about an ideal role that you could sing. Like, what is that role that you would do? What is that ideal dream role? And, as a response, they're like, I don't know, whatever gets me paid, and it's like, well, think about it ideal. Like, really, this is dream role. Like, what is it? And they don't know how to answer that. And I just think that you need to be able to answer what are the dreams that you have, like what is the ideal situation that you want to be in, because even if you don't get to that exact spot, it still says something about you, and it still says it contributes to your brand and contributes to your message, and it allows you to prioritize things and make decisions better, and take certain pathways towards your future without kind of aimlessly looking around and not knowing exactly what you're shooting for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I like what you said, like when kids are in college and when people are in college. I think a lot of people, I know for me it was, a lot of people go through college, and they use that as a self-discovery because they're exposed to so many different people, and they probably moved away from home, and they're kind of on their own, and they're having to figure things out themselves. So they go through a huge phase of self-discovery, and that can kind of set the groundwork for who they are as a person and as a musician. Would you say, have you seen that happen often with your students?
Yeah, definitely. And, a lot of times too, it can be a little bit weird because when you're in music school, a lot of your teachers sometimes, mine didn't quite do this, but I know a lot of students that have this, where their teacher chooses their repertoire for them. And it creates this kind of weird self-fulfilling prophecy where you start off not really knowing like who you are, and then you continue to not know who you are because you never get to choose that. So if you are in that situation in music school where somebody's constantly telling you, you're in orchestra, you don't get to choose what you play. You're in choir, you don't get to choose what you sing. Maybe even in your private lesson, you don't get to choose what you play. That might happen so much that by the time you get out of college, you're like wait, who am I again? Like what do I actually enjoy? So yeah, it can be really tough. And I think a lot of times, I just had a conversation with another musician, Felicia, who I had on my podcast, and she plays in a mariachi band. She's a violinist, and she also has a band called AOE that plays anime and video game music. And she's very niched down like that. And it's cool because she has a DMA, she went through all the school, and we had this conversation around like, we can just keep going into like what other people tell us to do for so long. But if we stop and think, we might realize that there's something really specific that we enjoy more and that we really want to do. And if you have all those technical skills that that you work on in college, then you can use those towards anything you want in the future. So it's really about stopping and thinking and realizing like, who am I? What do I love?
And so like as these people are going through, and even maybe, maybe you didn't go to school and 20 years later you were in this job and you've worked, this job and you're kind of self-discovering yourself now and you kind of want to make a transition into music. But even for those going through school and they're kind of involved in everything, they're doing everything they can. And then once they get close to finishing their program and they're kind of figuring out what they want to do for their job, their life, whatever, how can they kind of water everything down a little bit so they're not throwing everything in like, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a football player, I'm a cheerleader, I'm a basketball player, I'm a pianist, I'm a violinist, I'm a singer, and it's like, it's just too much. How can one take all that information and condense it down to the important stuff that you need for your brand?
So you mean like if you have multiple interests and you don't know how to...
Right. And maybe even you just maybe don't know how to write about yourself, because a lot of people struggle with that. Like, hey, I can do all these things. I'm just going to throw all of that on my resume. Well, that's not really ideal. Like if you can weld, that's really not important for
I've seen
being
all
a
that.
musician.
I've totally seen all that. When we build a website, there's a lot of times, and I talk to my students and my clients about the hierarchy of messaging. So basically you really want to focus on the most important stuff the most amount of times. So, I had a student who was like, I really love making crepes. And he was a music theater student and he worked at a creperie and he was really good at it. And I was like, well, that's cool, but that doesn't really help you in your music theater career. Like think about that as more of a fun little tidbit and less about something that should take prominence. So one thing I would suggest, you said if you don't know how to write about yourself or you don't know how to narrow it down, ask trusted friends who know you very well what they would write about you. Ask them for a list of adjectives or words or phrases or things that they think of when they think of you. I have my students do this when we dive deeper into their brand, and a lot of them are frozen. They don't know how to describe themselves. But all the students in my classes, they're all really close. So they know each other really well. And so I let them do it for each other. So they'll come up with great descriptors and great adjectives and things. And yeah, it allows you to kind of see yourself from an outside perspective more. So that can really help. I would say if you have kind of like distracto brain where you're looking at all these different things and you're like, well, I wanted to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this. It's just a matter of like, you don't have to set your life now. Like you don't have to choose your one path right now, but just think about like, what do I want to accomplish in the next year or the next 3 months? Brands are really about big picture messaging. And they're not about specifics so much. So it's really about like, what is that big picture and how can I outline that so that no matter what I do, I'm kind of floating within that big picture. So it might not be like your example of being like football and musician at the same time. Like maybe you don't kind of have those two stark ends of your personality, but maybe there is a connection. As a vocalist, being a football player allows you to be more fit and it gives you more strength in your voice and et cetera. So there's different ways that you can incorporate all of that together. But yeah, it's just, you have to kind of pick one thing and focus on it for a while and see what feels good and see what feels like it aligns with you. There's no rule that you have to be married to one thing. But I think it's important to try everything out with like full intensity until you figure out what it is that you're trying to do. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that definitely does. Because even for myself, as you know, I like to be involved in the business side of the industry, but I also like writing music. So it's kind of like this push and pull, and I haven't decided what I want to do. Do I want to stay in the business side and then kind of create music on the side, or do I want to like try to create music and then try to get involved in the business side? So it's kind of like this push and pull of all this stuff, and I still haven't figured out what exactly I want to do, but I have an idea of all the things that are available to me and the things that can happen. And I think that's something too, that once these people get out in the industry, once they start performing gigs or they get in the studio and they're realizing there is a lot more to music than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes. So, you know, you could make a complete change of pace and say like, hey, I want to be a songwriter, or I want to be a recording engineer. You know, it's just like, that's what I want to do. You know, so these people come out, and these students, and I have classmates when I graduated from school, you know, they went in with one thing, and that's what they're doing, you know, and you got to keep an open mind to all this stuff. And I think that's very important too.
Totally. And like, to what you're saying, those two things are not that different. Like, they're still involved in the same circle of like, you know, business basically. But I would say, like, I do have a friend, her name is Kristen, and she's a percussionist as well. And she is, you would think that like what she does would feel like different personalities, but somehow it all comes together. So she is actually a like fitness. She used to teach fitness classes. I don't know that she does it so much anymore, but she is sponsored by a fitness apparel company as a touring percussionist in a, it's kind of like a Blue Man Group type act where she does a lot of choreography and drumming at the same time. So as a really athletic oriented musician, that's kind of like the perfect realm for her. And it combines both her fitness and her musician sides. And, you know, she's sponsored by like Dream Cymbals, and she's also sponsored by this fitness apparel company. And so you would think, yeah, I can't do sports and music, but she's doing it. So you could totally figure out ways to combine those things together.
And I think that's cool because a lot of people make it work. You know, like that's something super unique. Like, how often do you see a fitness player involved with music?
Yeah.
Like, those are almost like in high school, those are like two opposite sides of the spectrum. Like, you don't see somebody playing sports and in theater.
No.
Like, it's just, you don't hear of that. So like, for her doing it as a job is cool.
It is. And like from the perspective of the companies that sponsor her, it's really cool to have someone unique in their list of sponsorships. Like this apparel company, like not everyone on their feet is probably super sporty and super, you know, they're doing cycling and doing all these things. Well, one of them is a drummer, and it's just cool for them to be able to say like, hey, anybody could, you know, anybody's an athlete. It doesn't have to be the obvious version of it, you know? So yeah, it's completely awesome. I love it.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's really cool. So after the artist has your students have kind of discovered themselves and they're working through everything and they've kind of figured out their story, and now they're putting together their website. What are some things that an artist should have on their website? Does an artist or musician need to have a website, and why?
Yes, I would say an artist and musician definitely needs a website. You don't need to have anything super fancy. I always suggest if someone doesn't want to pay, just to use like Weebly. It's one of the easiest like platforms that you can use to build a website. And that's what I teach my students, but I personally love Squarespace. It just is a matter of your budget. But I would say, as far as what you need on your website, the number one thing is just to make sure that hierarchy of messaging is clear and consistent throughout. So you're not, I've had students before, like the main picture, the first thing you see is them like on top of a mountain because I love hiking. Well, that's a great photo of you, but it's not something I would feature on the first page because it immediately confuses the audience about what am I supposed to be following you for? yeah, if I don't see you like in your element on a stage, like doing the thing that you're telling me that you do, then I'm not sure what I'm trying to look at right now. So make sure that your hierarchy of messaging is very clear and that you have the most, like I said before, the most important thing about you is like the first thing and the most frequent thing that you see. So you want to have on your landing page, you want to have an introduction both visually and with some kind of impact statement about who you are and what you do. So that should be very clear. And then you want to make sure that there's some kind of call to action before anybody has to scroll or move or go beyond that first landing page. So like for instance, on my website, and I'm not set up as a musician on my website, but it's the same concept. It's that you see me like right away, there's a visual and it says, find your fans so you can get booked, sell songs, and make more money as a musician. Learn more. There's a click right away. So that tells the person what I do and help people with. And it also gives them right away a place to go and a call to action. So those two things I would say are the most important thing. For my students, we have a project where we build a website, and I have them do like a 4-page website. So there's a landing page, the homepage. There's an about page which has a bio on it, and there's a contact page which has a form to contact, but also your email address just written on the page because sometimes those forms don't work or people don't like to use them. And then the 4th page is whatever they want it to be. So it can be a media page or a blog or upcoming events or whatever. So those are the things that I always make sure people are always looking for about, and they're always looking for contact. So you should always have those in your menu because that's probably the reasons why people are coming to your website in the first place. So those are my like basic tips for a website.
Yeah, that's definitely super helpful, especially for somebody who, like building a website can be very intimidating. So like, and not even knowing what to put. So like, obviously, like if you like welding or you like hiking, for example, that wouldn't be the first thing you'd put on your music page.
And you can put that in your bio. And I like for a bio, I always have like, for mine, I kind of break it up into 3 different paragraphs. And the first paragraph is kind of like credentials and titles and things. The second paragraph is more bragging points, like maybe I studied with this person, I premiered this work, those kind of subjects. And then the third paragraph would be fun, personal tidbits. Like, I also enjoy welding in my free time, would be in the bottom.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. So now after the artist has launched their website and they're ready to kind of like start really hitting it hard with promotion of their music and maybe getting more shows and like building up their fans and really kind of garnering themselves some traction, how can one go about it? I know you put in your form that you had said that you have a Phony-Free Marketing Formula. Can you kind of break that down a little bit for us and tell us how to kind of start growing your fans?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this already, but I'm going to break it down more with like the formula in mind. So what it is it's about clarity, consistency, and currency. So clarity is all about knowing your message. I've talked about this a lot already, but knowing who you are and why it is you're creating and what your purpose is. Consistency is about making sure that you share content frequently, but also that you're sharing the content that aligns with your message. So you're consistent with the number of times, but also with the type of content that you're sharing. And then currency is, I like to call stories your social media currency. And by that, I mean that when you're sharing stories about yourself, about your life, you're really actually contributing a conversation and you're creating an atmosphere where the ideal person that you want to have follow you is going to start feeling like they love to hear from you. They want to be a part of the conversation. It's like creating that signage that makes that person say, yeah, I want to follow that person. So those three things are what you need to create phony-free marketing. So if I would say, like, if marketing feels inauthentic to you and it feels like icky in some way, then you're not doing it in a way that aligns with you. So you need to reframe and think about how you're creating content. If you are just haphazardly posting and you don't have a plan and there's no big picture and you're just like, oh my God, I have to post something today. Hurry up, selfie, here I go. That is going to create probably anxiety around social media because you're just reacting. You're not planning. And it's also going to create an environment that you didn't necessarily want to curate. Right, because you're not planning what you want the atmosphere to look like. You're just kind of reacting and posting content that you feel like, oh, I have to meet this deadline. I have to post something today. So you're not actually like same as I was talking about with the brand. You're not stopping to think like, why am I doing this in the first place? What am I trying to create here? So I think it's really important to plan stuff ahead of time and just at least look at your calendar for the month and think like, by the end of this month, what do I want to have accomplished? What message do I want to have shared? And then backtrack and sort of fill in the gaps with that. So I actually have a 30-day content calendar that you can download for free, and I'll share the link with you so that your listeners can get it. But it's basically 30 days of ideas for musicians specifically, and they're all just prompts for stories. So it allows you to, like, I don't know what to share about myself. I don't know what to say, Well, one of the prompts is like, what's your songwriting process? Or how do you practice technique? Or how do you de-stress? So they're all things that are very specific to musicians, but also things that musicians come across in their lives. So it just allows you to kind of look at the big picture and really think about, like I said, like, what is that message? What are you trying to share? Because it just makes it feel less reactive. It makes it feel like, yeah, I have a plan. I'm actually creating something that feels good for me. And it feels like I'm not just panic mode putting stuff out there. So I think that will help ease a lot of anxieties around social media for musicians, especially because musicians don't like to feel narcissistic. Like, we don't want people to think we're bragging. A lot of us are introverted, and a lot of us we're not used to, we're used to just getting out on a stage and like showing the final product. We don't really talk a lot about the whole process that gets there, right? So this hopefully will help.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of musicians are, like you said, are very introverted, and they focus on they're very kind of like tunnel visioned. They think of like, oh, I'm going to write my music. I'm going to get out there and perform. I'm going to come home, write more music, and perform, rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of people, they want to get in and they want to learn that because, I love this song. How did you create it? So sharing that stuff is very, very important. I know for some of my favorite musicians, I love getting into there and kind of picking their brains and seeing like how did they create it? How, like, a lot of the electronic artists that I follow, they're sharing screen captures and like 10, 15-minute videos of literally all of the elements, plugins, and their effects chains on how they're creating specific sounds and putting together their songs. It's like that's super, super helpful and interesting content for somebody like me who's very interested in that artist and who loves the song.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, their followers are probably leaning towards like electronic or like very analytical type of people. And yeah, I mean, I follow musicians that share a lot of the songwriting process. They share a lot of family life. They share a lot of like, what does their studio look like? That's what I really like seeing. So it just depends on like, who do I want to reach and like, what can I do to reach them? So yeah, that's a great example.
Mm-hmm. And granted, like some of the people that follow, and like probably a majority of the people that follow these musicians or even artists, electronic artists, they're not going to know like what you're doing in Ableton or Logic and what OTT and compression is. Like, they're not going to know what any of it. But either way, it's cool to hear how they put together the sounds, like the origination, and then like all the effects after and how they completely change the sound.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really cool to hear. And like, how do they do that? And how do they know how to do that? So that's what's interesting to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I know for me it is, especially. So do you have any examples of people who are following your Phony-Free marketing formula or any any bigger artists or even smaller artists that are just kind of like totally dominating with this formula?
So I work mostly like right now, a lot of my students, this is what I'm teaching them. So they're really into it because it makes it feel like they don't have to, like I said, they don't have to react. They don't have to, panic mode, create content. Some of my favorite artists that I'm following right now, are Stacey King from Sucra. I really love, she used to sing in Isley as well. I don't know if you know that band, but, I really love her content because she shares, like I was kind of describing her when I was just talking to you earlier about, she shares family life, but she also like, she'll have a video of her adding her vocal tracks to her songs. And what I really love that she's doing is she's doing this project all year where I think it's the last Friday of every month, she releases a new single. And she does it like she'll create the single during that month. So it's not like she has them already all in the can. Like she's doing it all as the year goes by. And so while she's kind of creating the single, she goes through the process on her Instagram. And I just love following that because I've always loved her voice and her lyrics and her melodies. And I just love watching them unfold. And that's completely the idea of it is totally following the formula. Whether she knows it or not, she follows it because it's all about sharing the story of how it's created. And her kind of aesthetic and her brand is very clear, and she everything she does is stylized in that way. So I just really appreciate that. I do have a really cool example of another person I follow, and I'm gonna maybe butcher this story because I don't know the numbers offhand, but this is Jeremy Larson. He performs under the name Violence Music, Violents. And so he kind of started as a like string arranger I think he arranged for like Switchfoot and a bunch of other random people, but he sort of transitioned into making his own music, and he even did a couple of EPs with female vocalists. So every EP he released, it was a different singer. It was a really cool project. And I really liked that because it was like collaboration is one of the biggest ways you can help grow your audience. So he did that. And then he did a little bit of work he arranged like some Prince songs after Prince died. And he did some sort of album. I don't know how he got that gig, but it was really cool. And then he also did a remix of a Casey Musgraves song for her Japan tour. And when he posted about those, he just kind of shared like, this was so cool. I'm really grateful to have worked with Casey Musgraves. Like I did a remix of her song, High Horse, and it's going to be released in Japan and you can buy it here. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel really grateful. Right. Like seems like a very typical type of post, which is cool. And it got, I'm going to guess like probably about 600 likes, 20 comments. And then he kind of transitioned a little bit more. And he adopted a daughter with his wife, and he created this EP, which for the first time, he actually, he wrote all the songs, but he sang them all as well, which he hasn't done at all. And that was a big thing. And so he actually shared a post that was a clip of the song, and he shared the whole story about it. He shared like, I feel really vulnerable singing this. It's not typical for me to want to be in front of a mic, but I really wanted to do it because the message of this song, it goes to my daughter, and it talks a lot about my conflicting feelings about adoption and how hard it is for her to like leave everything she knows behind and join this family. And it was just such a raw personal story, and it was so just vulnerable. And he shared that, and you would think that like, talking about Casey Musgraves would get you way more likes. This one got 36,000 views and likes and 500 comments. So like
Wow.
a huge, huge response compared to working with a huge celebrity, which is not what you would think. So that's just kind of one of my like, it's proof that stories impact your audience. And everybody was just like wanting that from him. They wanted to hear that because he was very kind of under the radar most of the time. He didn't really share too much about himself. So that was just such a thing that I think everyone in his audience was just so affected by. And it totally goes with what I'm saying with the Phony-Free Formula. It's about sharing stories. It's about being authentic to you and being vulnerable and letting people into your life. And that's what he did, and it really made an impact.
Yeah, and do you think, like, I mean, of course, the stories that you share, you'll want to create something that's more, or share a story that's more relatable versus more of an inside joke.
Yes.
Would you agree to that?
Yeah, and I would say, like, just be careful to remember that not all of your audience is a musician. So, share it, like, from a big picture perspective, not the little minutia details.
Right. Like I've heard people share, or a musician sharing, an artist sharing little jokes of them and their friends. Well, that's an inside joke and nobody else gets it. So it's kind of a waste of time for you to post it. Share that to something personal, not an artist page or something. But also, I think the relatable, like with Jeremy's story, I think the climate behind, the vulnerability and opening up and just the thoughts and stuff behind adoption is a lot of people can relate to that, and they understand the process or know somebody who has adopted. So a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah. It was not a musician conversation. It was a person conversation.
You're right. And I think I personally like to see artists, especially my favorite musicians, opening up and sharing kind of their personal lives and all those things, because at the end of the day, they are a person. They are a human. They go through struggles. They go through up highs and lows. They buy houses. They buy cars. They go through the daily things that everybody else does. It's just that we don't hear about them as often.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I really find that interesting, and that's really cool. I'll definitely have to check that out when after the show. So yeah, that pretty much concludes everything I have for you. You covered so much. So I want to thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all of your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate giving me the chance to talk to you guys. And I hope this kind of helps people be more open and vulnerable a little bit with their social media. It's really, it should be a tool for awesomeness, not like anxiety, right?
Absolutely. It should be a fun tool, not something for like, oh my God, I have to post on social media.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can the listeners follow up with you if they have any questions on something you had maybe said, or just keep up with you, your music, your teachings, your content?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at Megan Kuhar. It's MEGANKUHAR. And you can also, I have a Facebook group that's called the Fan Finder Forum. And it's a private group for musicians about branding and marketing specifically. So if you want to learn more about how to brand and market and learn more about social media, then go ahead on Facebook and just search Fan Finder Forum. You can find me there.
Perfect. And I'll put the links to those in the show notes as well, so everybody can check them out pretty easily. So thanks again, Megan, for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I had a great conversation with Miss Megan Kuhar. She shared so much information with all of us about branding and growing yourself as an artist and then developing a loyal fan base. So I'm so thankful that she was able to join me on this show, and I loved our conversation. As a quick reminder, don't forget to subscribe to my mailing list, which is in the show notes below, as it helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live. I would also appreciate you if you'd support me on Patreon, as it helps the money that I make through Patreon will go directly back into the show. There is a Google form in the show notes below as well, so if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please don't hesitate to fill it out or send it over to them, and I will reach out if they are, or they are a good guest for the show. Lastly, I would really, really appreciate a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts, as it helps me grow the show and it looks good for the show. I mean, I look good. Why wouldn't you want the show to look good? So don't forget to give that a 5-star rating below, guys. And I would also appreciate a review if you have the time or would like to take some extra time to do so. Thanks again for tuning in on this episode of When Life Hands You Lemons, and we will see you next week on When Life Hands You Lemons.